So one of my favorite movies of all time is Legally Blonde. Elle Woods is a 20-year-old fashion major in Southern California with big dreams and aspirations. Over dinner, her boyfriend tells her she's not serious enough, and he's an aspiring senator. She believes that the only way to get back at him is by going to Harvard Law and graduating as a top law student. Towards the end of the movie, we even see Elle Woods solve her murder case just because she knew the rules of perm maintenance. Now, as silly as this may seem, I think it can solve a big problem that's dealing with Gen Z and our involvement of government, of all things. When we think of pop culture, Gen Z, government, they don't really mesh well. Well, we have media and government. We have shows like Scandal, The West Wing, The Purge, Hamilton, all big shows that put our government into spotlight. But when we think of Gen Z in pop culture, we have so much more to look at. Shows that we deem iconic. Like I mentioned earlier, Legally Blonde, Euphoria, Glee, Spider-Man, Mean Girls, and the list goes on and on. These are Gen Z shows that we know and love. We know the characters, we know their stories, and we relate to them. Now, where does this all converge? Well, let's first look at media and government. In 2014, President Barack Obama wore a tan suit of all things, to a media conference. Instead of focusing on the new plans for our military, media outlets decided to focus on the fact that he wore a tan suit. Well, as ridiculous as this may sound, this is a great example of putting our media and our government together. They don't really converge, but we have things to look at like the appearance of our public officials. Now, where does Gen Z come into this? According to the Census Voting and Registration, 28.4% of eligible voters in 2022, ages 18 to 24, casted a vote. That was Gen Z at the time. That is less than 1/3 of all of Gen Z that were able to cast a vote. Less than 1/3 of Gen Z were able to make a change in their government. Less than 1/3 were able to decide who was in control of them. Another point I want to make to you is from the Pew Research Center. They say the most effective way to enact change is through voting. Regardless of local or national election, your vote matters. Your vote matters. A big issue that Gen Z is tending to have is not voting. At the click of a button, millions of people can know how we feel. Millions of people can know their opinions on this and that. But if we don't vote, we aren't able to make the change. But why? Why don't we vote? Why, as Gen Z, do we not vote? Well, there's some big issues that I want to point out to you first. Firstly, this is from today. U.S. Senate members and U.S. House of Representatives. This is the average ages. U.S. Senator members are around 64 years old, and U.S. House of Representative members are around 58. That's around a 40-year gap between Gen Zers and who is running our government. 40 years. Think of someone 40 years older than you making decisions, because that's what's happening. Now, this is a big problem because 40 years ago, education wasn't the same. And they're making decisions about how your education is being ran and how education everywhere is. But that's just a small factor. Now let's put it into a fact that you may relate to. The Voice of America did a poll amongst voters of all generations and all ages. They found that 89% of voters disapproved of the ages for the 2024 presidential candidates, Trump and Biden. That's overwhelmingly the majority of voters disapproved of the ages of these two individuals. Now, I'm not going to get into specifics of how old these individuals are, but they're closer to their age numbers are closer to this 89 than they are to you. Another big reason that Gen Z doesn't participate and has a big disapproval of our government is change. They haven't seen change. We can look at the then and now. Back in the civil rights movement, people had to fight to be heard, their voices to be heard, changes to be made in how they're treated based off racial, sexuality, and even disability. But even now in 2024, we still have to fight tooth and nail for this to change. If our government hasn't changed it then and they won't change it now, well, what's the point in voting anyways? A big issue with Gen Z is that we tend to put social media over social change. We put the fact that, well, everybody can know how I feel. I can post a TikTok in 10 minutes and millions of people can know how I feel. But will millions of people's lives be changed if you post that TikTok? Maybe mentally, but how will it physically actually be changed? I think as Gen Z, we need to shift our focus on pop towards politics. Shifting our focus on, oh, the new show's coming out, have you seen it, girl? To, have you seen the new legislation? Let's get that fixed. Now, of course, we love our shows, we love to focus, but hear me out for a second. What if we took how much we're dedicated to Mean Girls as we are to a similar factor like who's in charge of our government and who's in charge of our government and the checks and balances system. Now, hear me out, guys. We have Regina George, Gretchen Wieners, and Karen Smith. They all keep each other in check. They won't let anyone wear pink and it's not Wednesday. But what if we look at it this way? Regina George is the president, Karen Smith is the U.S. House of Representatives, and Regina George, and Gretchen Wieners is the Supreme Court. They each keep each other in check, similar to how these three women do. I want to give you all this presentation today because of something one of my friends said. On her 18th birthday, I texted her and said, "Are you excited to vote?" She was my first friend that turned 18 at the time, and she said essentially this to me. She felt as if her voice didn't matter when it came to voting. This really shocked me as someone who she's always the first to complain about school lunch, about things happening in foreign countries, yet she didn't want to vote. She felt as if her small voice didn't matter, regardless of how big of a voice she had. Now, she's not completely wrong. There's obviously data that suggests that she isn't. When we look at this data, we have the dark pink being Gen Z, this hot pink being Gen X, and this light pink being boomers. At the first set of 18-year-olds of each of these generations, these were their percentage of their voter turnouts. As you can see, Gen X had the highest amount of voter turnout, but Gen Z is lacking behind. As we look into the current election, Gen Z is still very behind, and boomers actually lead that. That's someone way older than you making decisions that impact you. But several sources say that Gen Z is on the way if we do one thing: vote. We're on the way to being at or above the same amount of voting turnout as these other two generations. We always hear, your vote matters, your vote matters. But what if we change that rhetoric into your vote, your impact? The vote you choose to make will impact you specifically. I'm here today with a quote by Shirley Chisholm. "You don't make progress by standing on the sidelines, whimpering and complaining. You make progress by implementing ideas." If we continue to only use the fact that we can post and share, although that's important, we need to actually make action and continue to vote in order to make that change that we want to see. Thank you.